What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Rise Real Estate Investing Podcast with your host, Mayutava. Just going to be me today. Austin's tied up in a little bit of a personal matter. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the market with regards to it's been about a week since we had that rate cut. So what we're seeing in the market regarding that, we did sell property. I'll talk about that as well. And then we'll talk about our own acquisition that we have going on and the ups and downs and kind of challenges that I've been dealing with there. So let's start off with the rate cut. So it's been about a week or just over a week. The 5-year government bond yields have dropped. I think it dropped 0.3 and then now it's sitting exactly basically at that 0.25. So not a whole lot of movement. Sometimes you want to see a bigger drop in the yields because it's a bond yield rather than what the actual cut was that was announced, just to kind of support the notion of future rate cuts. But keep in mind, on a 5-year term, we're sitting at, I think it was 3.5 or 3.4. Last time I checked, that's a government rate, and then obviously the banks apply a spread to it, right? So, it's kind of indicative of where they think yields will be over a 5-year period, kind of averaging it out, right? Which really, if you look into what that really means, is they think we'll be below 3.5 over a 5-year period, because right now we're quite a bit above it, right? So that'll be interesting, kind of just see how that plays out. I'd say from our consumers or our clients in the mortgage business, hasn't had that much of an impact as people might have initially thought. And the reality is, like, we were 1% on the way up. And then now we're doing like a 0.25 cut, which is really like a drop in the bucket. And it really means jack shit, to put it lightly, right? So, very small impact on people's budgets. It might be enough. I think multiple property investors are really the ones that are going to be feeling a little bit more relief. But if you just had one property, two properties, you're likely not seeing a major shift in your budget on a monthly basis. It's about, I think it was $100 for every $750K in debt is what I'd calculate on our side. So it's kind of like interesting. We'll wait and see how that plays out as we get closer to July 5th, as more economic data comes out to show what the Canadian markets will be doing. The US did kind of state that at most they'd be looking at one rate cut this year. So that's not the best for Canada and future rate cuts, as there's only so much we can kind of deviate from the US. But enough about that. Second kind of piece of business this week is we did manage to sell a property firm. It was interesting. We tried to get an offer date. We did put an offer date. On offer date, there was only one offer, and that too, very hard negotiation. Started off like 40K below where we wanted to be, and we kind of met in the middle at about 25K, or I guess like 15K below where we wanted to be. So overall, we were okay with the price, but it was conditional on both financing and inspection, which we knew is a very weak condition. On inspection, of course, they basically just dropped a laundry list of stuff. Our realtor managed to do a pretty good job there on just kind of like knocking off a lot of the items they were asking for, and then we just agreed to, I think it was like I don't want to say the exact amounts in case someone that knows them is listening to this episode, but we agreed to a small like price reduction, which we were pretty comfortable on, and we basically went firm on that. So that's interesting. The reason we sold that one ultimately, like, it was a student rental, and student rentals are great for people that have time. I think especially if you can actively manage it yourself, I think it makes a lot of sense. We noticed that with vacancy, and so then you have a period of vacancy, like call it like 1 month every like time a tenant turns over. You got to constantly be doing repairs to the property because it's just higher wear and tear. And then you have constant releasing out fees. We just noticed that we weren't really making much cash flow. And this is the same property that we had to replace the, that line to the city septic, city water line. I can't remember what it's called. But we had to replace that, which is some expensive bills. And we spent a lot of money on this property. And we were just like, you know what? It's kind of just like a drain. And so we wanted to move it. And so we're glad to have gotten it off. And we did have one of those static variable payments where the payment didn't go up, but we weren't necessarily making any contributions towards principal either. So it really was starting to make less and less sense as we had already kind of gotten the lift out of the property. So that's why I think everyone should be constantly doing is just looking at their portfolio and saying, what would I buy today at this valuation? And if I wouldn't buy today, then it might make sense sometimes to sell it, right? Which you start to get a little bit tough because then you look at everything that you already squeezed the lift out of, and most of our returns are made on getting that lift in value of the property rather than owning the real estate long term, right? So it's kind of like just be a flipper then. But we'll kind of wait and see how that plays out. On the commercial property that I've talked about in the past here, that one, it's interesting. I had a small bully offer for someone to just kind of buy it from me, but didn't want to let it go at kind of what they were offering, but we'll kind of see how that plays out. My partner probably needs to be replaced on that one. It's kind of like an example of just kind of like taking on too many projects at the same time. So he took on another project that's a little bit shorter of a timeline, a little bit faster of a payout and stuff like that. And he wants to close that all cash. So he's kind of like, you know what, I'm not 100% sure if I'll be able to be the capital partner on this one anymore. So I might replace him. Got 2 conversations with 2 different people, and then there's always the option of just making a quick assignment fee on it. So we'll see how that's playing out. But I'd say today, in today's environment, it's still a time that you can get some decent VTBs on some of these properties that are more investor oriented. Like you're not getting a VTB on a single family house, in my opinion. But if you go for like a 10 unit, 15 unit building with cap rates or net income that doesn't support the debt, VTBs are definitely a viable option in today's world. I had another client that locked up a 6 unit where the seller was willing to offer a VTB. You just have to get smart about how you negotiate and how you agree on the VTB terms, because that could really impact financing as well. So kind of went through that with them as well. But, if you guys are in the market, it's definitely not a bad time to pick up assets. I'd say we're very near like peak fear. Like it could, most of the pain is felt after a rate cut. So don't go like guns blazing yet. But, it's not a bad time to kind of just keep dollar cost averaging in, which we've been doing for the last 2 years into this market, right? So with that being said, today's episode is with Eric. Eric is actually a great episode for today because I think it speaks to the volume of just kind of creating active businesses in the real estate sphere. He lives in Sudbury, he's native to the area. He started off growing his portfolio in 2018 or 2019, I believe, just organically like buying his first property at the age of 20 while he was working full time. And then he, kind of just scaled up a small multifamily portfolio of properties, right? In 2013, he left his job to start up some active income streams. That's what we talked about a little bit. We talked about the property management business, understanding how he's doing the wholesaling side and expanding his real estate portfolio at the same time. And I think active businesses and getting that income up is something a lot of people need to focus on in today's market. The reality is wages are stagnant. And there's only so much you can make in your day job, and you're just trading time for dollars, right? So creating some sort of a business that can help you kind of grow your portfolio is a great way to get further ahead in the real estate game as well. Hope you guys enjoyed the episode. As always, if you guys do, share with a friend, drop a 5-star review on Spotify or Apple. We are on YouTube as well. We do drop the video on YouTube as well. So we'd appreciate if you guys gave us a follow there and dropped a like on our podcast episodes and shorts. Tune in next week, guys.
Hello, everyone. We are joined with our very special guest, Eric Coulombe. Eric, how's it going, my man?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you guys doing what you're doing with sharing value to everybody that's involved in the industry. I really enjoy listening to your preambles. So,
for sure, man. And thanks for jumping on. We've known you for quite some time now. We've seen your evolution. Started off as a relatively quiet Sudbury investor, in my opinion, and then you just kind of just getting louder and louder and more active businesses and everything that kind of came into fold as well. But for anyone that doesn't know you, give us a quick background on how you got started in this space.
Yeah, so I started back in 2018, which it feels like it was only a couple of years ago, but it's already been 6 years, which is crazy. I was 20 years old while I was working full time. Just started off with a smaller multifamily, like a duplex. Bought a few properties using creative financing and all that stuff. And then I just quit my job last year to dive full time into property management, wholesaling, and just basically stabilizing my portfolio and kind of going from there. So that's basically my journey in a nutshell. I know I kind of went over it quickly, but we can dive into more details.
Yeah, absolutely. You probably know the next question here. I think for a lot of newer investors, even experienced investors, they start from humble beginnings, right? So why don't you walk us through your first couple of acquisitions and how that came along? Because you did mention you use creative financing, which is something that a lot of people would probably be taking advantage of now because of how expensive it is to break into the market.
Yeah, for sure. So my first property, I just did the standard 5% down with CMHC financing as a primary residence. My second property is when I started getting more creative. The second property, I was able to connect with an investor in a coaching group that I was involved in. They basically lent the down payment for that property. So that was basically just getting a private loan for the down payment on the second property. The third property is when I actually started doing vendor takebacks. I definitely learned quite a bit with the vendor takebacks, especially with buying with emotions. We can get into that as well. I sold that property in about 8 to 12 months after buying it because I basically missed out on a few important things, like looking at what the numbers look like for renovations. The renovations were way more than I anticipated, and I wouldn't have been able to pull out my capital of that property for a really long time. So I had to sell that property. Fast forward to, the fourth property, I was able to get another property through direct mailer. That one there, I was able to negotiate a vendor take back as well with no payments for 12 months. And that one was a perfect BRRRR. I was able to do a few updates, renovate and refinance and go from there.
So, yeah, your entire portfolio is like located out in Sudbury, right?
Yeah, it's all in Sudbury.
And you live in Sudbury, you grew up in Sudbury, right?
Yeah, Greater Sudbury. So actually I live in Isilda, which is like 15 minutes from Sudbury, but it's like when you guys say GTA, like, there's like all these little cities around Toronto.
Yeah. Okay. So at that time when you got started, I'm gonna assume here like Sudbury was not really popping too much in 2018. It would have been a relatively like stable market. Any kind of like fears or concerns that you had at that point, or was it just like normalized to you because you grew up in Sudbury, right? And the reason I'm asking this is a lot of people look at what is perceived to be a small town, right? I know Sudbury's not necessarily like a small town in Canada, but a lot of like smaller town investing or like remote areas, and there's just like so many concerns about like the economics, the population, stuff like that, right? So I'm just wondering, was it just like you had blinders on and this is what you knew and it was normalized to you, or did you have any concerns about that at all?
For me, it was basically my backyard. So I know all the different areas. And like you said, I've born and raised here. So for me, it's like, it was actually less risky for me to invest in my backyard than investing out of town, just because my experience level. So for my first property, I was able to do, all the renovations myself and do all that stuff. So for me, it was just the best way to get started was to invest in my backyard. The cost of entry was low too, like Sudbury. I think my first place, I paid $200,000 for a duplex.
Right.
That same property I sold for $430,000 just a few years later. Obviously, the increase with the pandemic helped me, but the price of entry was definitely low when I started.
Gotcha. And then from there, I guess that third one, and we all have kind of like lessons like that in our portfolio where we have to make mistakes early on. I think underestimating renovation costs is something I still do to this date, because like we're like used to 2020 pricing sometimes, and we're just like, wow, this is ridiculous. Like, why would someone budget like 50 grand for this? This is a 20K job max, right? So I'm just curious then with that one, like was the purpose that you purchased it for was a BRRRR, but did you basically just have to flip it? And then when you flipped it, did you just kind of like walk out of it with like a wash, like not too much profit, not too much loss, or what happened there? Did it set you back?
Yeah, so from the beginning, I learned the whole thing about vendor take, aggressively looking for my next deal with a vendor take back. And I guess maybe I got impatient, I don't know, but I finally found a seller that was willing to do a vendor take back. But obviously there's a reason sometimes, they're willing to do a vendor take back. So I got 20% as a second on the property. And the cool thing is on closing, I got paid by the lawyers because all of the last month's rents covered all the legal fees. And I actually collected a bit of, money up front, which was cool. But obviously things didn't work out. Turns out the steel roof was not installed properly. So that was the big expense. The foundation was an old foundation. It was like on it was just iffy. It was like built on rocks, and there was a bit of moisture down there. It was a big project at the end of the day. It needed full cosmetics. And when I looked at the ARV, it just didn't make sense to spend all that money unless I was willing to hold on to it for 5 to 10 years, which isn't really aligned with my plans are.
And I'm just curious, what was the VTB terms that you got? And was this a property that was on the MLS, or you sourced yourself off the market?
I'm trying to think, but basically I believe the seller actually reached out to me on Facebook, and it was listed on the MLS, but it wasn't selling.
On Facebook, as in you had like a Facebook ad running or something along those lines?
Yeah,
Okay.
Exactly. I think I posted in a Facebook group, like a landlord group, and I just asked if anybody was looking to sell. And I think I even asked, he just told me, hey, I have a fourplex in this area. Are you interested? I was like, yeah, sure. I was like, would you consider doing a vendor take back? And he said, yeah, right away. And I should have known, okay, maybe there's a reason for it. But yeah, it's actually through Facebook. So there's a lot of different ways to find some good deals. This one wasn't a good deal, but I definitely learned from it. And I'm glad I learned from it early on before taking on bigger projects.
Gotcha.
I mean, I guess just kind of just jumping ahead through your journey there, right? It's kind of like, because I think the properties acquisitions, everyone's got their own journey on how we go about these. And it's a combination of scraping together what we can, taking risk where we can, where we need to, right? And some mistakes along the way. But jumping into what you've been up to today or over the last like 6 to 12 months, give us an idea of how things are going. Because I know you have quite a few other like active businesses now in the real estate sphere, let's call it.
Yeah. So last year, basically, well, ever since the interest rates started increasing, I decided to just focus on stabilizing my one of my last properties in my portfolio and kind of put a pause on acquisitions for now. And I definitely shifted towards more of an active businesses. The first reason was I wanted to leave my job. I just felt like my job was not aligned with the specific lifestyle that I want to achieve later on. So I basically figured out, okay, what skill am I good at that I could start as a side hustle while I'm working my job? And for me, that was property management, tenant acquisitions. I've turned over a few units in my own portfolio. I realized there was a demand for it in Sudbury. There's a lot of investors outside of Sudbury that are looking for tenant acquisitions or property management. So I saw an opportunity. I hired an assistant to help me out while I was working my full-time job. And things just kind of took off from there. Word of mouth got around that I was helping out investors. And I was able to leave my job a few months later once I realized that the income was more of a consistent income. So I felt comfortable leaving my job.
So let me ask you a couple questions about property management, setting up your own property management business, right? Because I think this is something a lot of investors, some point you hit kind of like a decision on, do I want to set up my own PM or do I just continue to outsource this, right? There's going to be periods of frustration and ultimately no one's ever going to do it as good as you would do it for your own portfolio, right? Your assistant that you hired, were they boots on the ground local or did you go the VA route? Let's start with that first. And why?
Yeah, it was actually local. The reason I hired the assistant was because I just didn't have enough time to work my full-time job and also do the property management, the tenant acquisitions. So I just had no choice but to hire a boots on the ground assistant to help me with doing the viewing, things that when I can't be there in person, at least I know somebody else is there in person. So yeah, you pay a bit more of a premium. Like I think I was paying $20 an hour, but it showed me that, okay, this business model works and I was able to fully commit to it.
Well, what are the margins like in a property management business? So I know, or at least what I've heard, correct me if this is a misconception, is that when you start property management, it is quite lucrative because a lot of what you're doing is between you and one other employee. But of course, as problems arise, and I'm sure you ran across either non-payment of rent or troublesome tenants, it just happens in this sort of business, then it becomes a lot more time consuming because your pay is pretty much fixed at whatever you charge your clients, right? But now you're doing 4 times the amount of work. Like, what do the margins sort of look like while scaling this business? And how do you keep it profitable while continuing to acquire clients? Because you don't want all of your time to be in property management.
Yeah, for sure. Like right now, it's a lot of low expenses just because I do a lot of things myself. But obviously, as the scaling grow and the biggest thing for us is we don't want to bite off more than we can chew. What happens is I've heard of, I don't want to point fingers, but there's a lot of companies that grow too fast and they don't have the right systems in place. They don't have the right team members in place. And then their services kind of get impacted by that. So for me, what's important is we are focused on growing, but we're also careful on how fast we grow as well. So for now, the expenses are fairly low. Like I said, basically we work very closely with contractors that are reliable for what we need. But eventually, we're likely going to hire talented in-house employees that we can lower our expenses and just help us scale.
So what are the expenses of this business? Do you have a full-time handyman, for example, that you're paying hourly no matter how much work they have? Do you have any software? I know that you have that one other employee. What actually goes down in the expense line of a property management business?
Software for sure. Software is not a big expense, but it is a recurring expense. The other things would probably be just advertising, social media. Those are all things that you can get a VA to help you with, posting on social media. I'm sure you guys probably have a VA for some items as well. As far as contractors go, basically, like as most property managers, we charge a percentage of the gross rents. But obviously, if the property needs to be fixed, like a maintenance issue or anything, those are all additional costs, right? So we typically just charge whatever the contractor charges us. So the expenses are fairly low. Like, it's just the biggest thing is the time. You need to have a lot of time. And if you don't have the time, then you need to be willing to spend money on having more employees.
What's the point at which you think what's the sweet spot in property management? And I'll give you an example. Like, if I have like 15 units in a city, my property management bill is somewhere, I think like $2,000 or something like that per month across all the units, if my math is correct. Maybe it's not that high, but whatever, right? And so at that point, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to hire like a VA to like manage this property, that's going to be like, I don't know, $800 a month, let's just say, right? Max, software, recording, blah, blah, blah. And then you're probably going to get slightly higher like rates on a contractor level, right? So at what point do you think it becomes an actually profitable business? The number that I was arriving at was managing at least 60 units. And then I think it becomes a little bit of a pain point after you hit like 120 units. So it's kind of like somewhere in that sweet spot of 60 to 100 would probably be the most profitable. But is that kind of what you're seeing, or what's the dirty details behind it?
Yeah, like as you start your company, like the property management business, you can't go in thinking you're going to be rich, like starting, the first year. It's a long-term play. And I agree with you. It's definitely more like the more doors you have, the more profitable. So I would say definitely like over at least 50 doors is when you start actually benefiting from the business. So you got to go in looking at it as a long-term investment. And then as you grow, you're going to notice there's other opportunities that come with having a property management company. So like if you're looking to acquire multifamily buildings or, flips, sometimes your clients are going to want to sell. So being involved in property management also feeds into other businesses as well.
Awesome. So I sort of want to pivot, actually, before we pivot the conversation here, I guess on your end of things, at least what I'm seeing in Windsor in particular, which is the market that I have most of my investment properties, is that while rents are climbing in sort of these secondary, tertiary markets, they're climbing drastically. Minimum wage is not necessarily keeping up. And it's something that we've talked about in this podcast before. And as a result, you see a lot of people loading up a specific unit with 4 or 5 people. And tenant quality has dropped. Vacancies are still very low, but tenant quality has dropped pretty drastically. What are you seeing on your end as someone that's leasing out units? And is it always worthwhile chasing the top dollar amount when leasing a unit?
That's like a setup. Like, how are you supposed to say yes to that?
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing a lot more demand on the, let's say, budget-friendly units that are, let's say, priced between $1,300 to $2,500. Anything more than that, like the higher end stuff, there's still demand for it, but obviously the pool of prospective tenants that are looking is a lot smaller. When it comes to having like premium rents, or if you're really shooting for the stars on your rent price, you definitely need to have a quality unit because there's a lot of inventory that is priced competitively. And if you're trying to get top dollar and, maybe the competitor has an extra parking spot or they have ensuite laundry, your good quality prospective tenants have a lot of options to choose from.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, with one of my rental units, it doesn't have ensuite. And when we were trying to release it out, we weren't able to get the same rents that we actually had before. Because to your point, there's a lot more inventory for these quality tenants to sort of choose from. So we have to actually cut the rent, unfortunately. But that's a great tip there. Outside of property management, let's sort of shift the conversation into, obviously that's one aspect of the income stream. You also do wholesaling. So how did you get into wholesaling, and walk through the process of sending out your first mailer, taking your first calls? Because for a lot of people, they want to do it, but a $4,000 or $5,000 investment is quite expensive, especially if you don't get any return on your first mailer campaign.
Yeah, doing a mailer campaign is definitely something you'd have to do like after you have a bit of experience, just because it's really easy to throw out $3,000 to $5,000 and not get anything out of it off the hop. So when I first started, I was doing a lot of direct mailers. So I was actually getting stamps at the post office, printing out my own flyers and sending them out to specific properties. I would drive around and, pinpoint properties that might need to be fixed up or look like they're in distressed, condition, and I would do a lot of direct mailers. And then, Kijiji, Facebook, all the online stuff you can do. I did whatever was free at the time to get started. That's what I did. And I still do it to this day. And then once you start getting a few deals in, then you could actually start spending more on marketing. And if you're okay with taking on the risk of not having any returns right away.
It's essentially the driving for dollars approach is really what you use to get started. And it sounds like you're probably getting started in an environment where wholesaling was ultra competitive, like 2021, 2022. The amount of flyers that were being sent out was crazy high, right? And this essentially allowed you to have a more targeted approach, right? Did you also get into flipping, or were you purely just like wholesaling off deals? How do you decide between what deals you want to flip versus wholesale? And then I have a follow-up question if you are flipping today.
Yeah, for sure. When it comes to deciding on flipping or wholesaling, you got to look at the return on time. Yes, you can make more money from flipping in some cases, but also you have to consider the risk level that comes with flipping and also the time it takes to complete the project. So that being said, if you can wholesale a property and get paid in 1 month instead of getting paid in 6 months, then you might consider wholesaling instead. So for me, it's just been mostly focusing on wholesaling. If the risk level is low and the project size is not too big, then it's definitely something to be considered as a flip.
Mm-hmm. And you're staying in one of your flips right now, actually. So you have the benefits of having personal use from it as well.
Yeah.
So back to the wholesaling topic, obviously being local in your specific region and doing it in your backyard, do you find that plays any sort of beneficial effect? Like when you go and meet sellers, are they asking you if you're from Sudbury? Has that led to more deals?
I don't know if it's led to more deals, but I can definitely say it's definitely helped negotiating deals for sure. A lot of times when I go, every lead I get, I go in person. If it's a qualified lead, I go there in person, face to face. When I sign the contracts, I'm, face to face. So it definitely helps a lot. But I do get a lot of sellers ask me if I'm local. I obviously am. So I'm sure it does help in some way. Some people, for some reason, I don't know why, they just don't like selling to people that are out of town.
Yeah.
But again, like if they're getting the price and terms they want, I don't see that being something to fuss about.
I've actually lost deals that way where someone has called. They're like, "Oh, are you from this area?" I'm like, "No, but we have purchased property." "Oh, not interested." Hang up. They didn't even let me finish my sentence.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but it's some of those individual, I can't imagine they're extremely serious, right? But of course, if you're local, there's a lot more to relate to them to build rapport from. That being said, you mentioned that you only go for qualified leads. So what is a qualified lead in your eyes? So you send out mailers, someone calls you. What's the next step after someone calls you? Like, how does that conversation go?
I'll give you an example of what is not qualified is if they call you and they say, "Hey, how much are you going to give me for my house?" And, like I typically say, every seller I work with, they already have a price in mind. Like if you go and buy a car, there's a price for that car. So it's same concept. I try to dig for motivation as well. Maybe I'll ask them like, "Oh, what are your plans after you sell the property?" And they're going to tell me, maybe they're moving out of country, moving out of town. So depending on the motivation and depending on the price point, from there, we'll do some research and see if it's actually worth me going and look at the property.
Gotcha.
How have you seen the wholesale market change in the last 12 months? 'Cause I think obviously if we're comparing to the heydays of 2022, 2021, yeah, sure, things would fly off the shelves, right? But in the last 12 months, have you seen a shift either on the seller side or the buyer side? I'm just curious what things are looking like right now because you've got essentially boots on the ground info.
Yeah, a lot of sellers are still stuck in the 2021, 2022 prices. So it's just basically explaining to them, educating them on today's market. With the increased interest rates, there's less buyers, so that puts a bigger risk on properties that you're looking to flip. Just being logical with the sellers and showing them the reason why their property might not be worth what they think it's worth. The other thing when it comes to finding buyers, it's definitely a lot slower than basically, I think the whole industry kind of slowed down in terms of buyers and sellers. So it's definitely been tougher finding good buyers, but we could still move some deals, and it just takes a little bit more work on the back end.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with a lot of the sentiment that you mentioned there. Finding quality buyers could sometimes be a little bit of trouble. And even then, they say that they want it at a specific price. You get it at that price, and sometimes they might just go MIA, right? I'm more curious on the negotiation side of things and you don't have to get, if you're comfortable, feel free to share. But in terms of the advertising, once you do the advertising, once you get the lead, are you competing against other wholesalers, or are you usually the only person chatting with that seller? And if you are competing against other wholesalers, what's the approach there?
Yeah, there's been a few cases for sure that the seller has talked with a few different companies. The biggest thing for me is I never talk bad about any other company. I think that if I were to go in and, start talking smack about other companies, they might sense that I'm that, it just doesn't look good. So I always say, hey, like, it's good that you have multiple options. Definitely look at all of your options. And then I just go over what my offer is, and I explain to them why I think my offer might be the best option for them based on maybe they're looking for a specific closing day, maybe they're looking for specific terms. I just show them that I'm really there just to help them out and get them to the finish line. So I think one of the benefits is, like you said, I can go there in person and actually build good rapport with the seller versus other companies might not be able to go there in person, or they might try to do it through the phone, which you could still do for sure. But sometimes when there's competition, you have to go there in person and talk to them.
Gotcha. And so from here, like, I guess, you've got the property management business going on, you've got the wholesaling business going on. I want to talk a little bit about the projects that you've got going on as well right now, because I think, correct me if I'm wrong, do you have a sixplex project going on right now, or has that one come to completion?
Yeah, so the sixplex I found on Kijiji, it was a for rent by owner ad I reached out to, and I asked if he would consider an offer on the building. And next thing you know, we agreed on price and terms, and now it's part of my portfolio. So that one's more like a 3 to 5 year play as the tenants move out, update the units, re-rent them, and eventually refinance. I'll part of the refinance in 2 different stages, but I think about 70% of the building is turnover. I did learn a lot from one tenant that I inherited. So it's still ongoing. I can't share too many details, but basically what happened is it's going to be 2 years in September since I haven't received the rent payment. We've gone through the LTV process, but now it's gone above the LTV. It's gone to the Superior Court, which I didn't know they could do. So this is definitely a professional tenant. My legal fees are in the 5 digits now. I'm glad I'm learning this now before, we take on bigger projects.
That's crazy. I had no idea that was a possibility for them to just go above the LTV like that. It'd be great if we had the same option, but it is what it is.
Yeah, so I can share a little bit of details. Basically, what happened is after you get an order from the landlord-tenant board, the tenant can actually appeal the order to the Superior Court of Justice. That is like a long process. Obviously, it could take, multiple months. I think we're almost at a year now, but they can do it. Obviously, it needs to be a good case. And it just takes a while. That's all.
Mm-hmm. I mean, when you're getting to that level, you're dealing with very professional tenants, right? I've heard cases where there are tenants that they're going to likely be evicted. They don't show up to the hearing. They make an excuse, and then it gets pushed back, and then something else comes up. It gets pushed back again and again. It seems like you're just dealing with one of those situations that, unfortunately, no matter how much due diligence you do, at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to catch something like that, right? It's just kind of, there's an element of luck there. And I guess from your point of view, I mean, obviously the focus is on active income at the moment. For acquisition, going back to that, are you finding that there's opportunities again in Sudbury? Because there was a moment in time where not just Sudbury, but most markets were not really cash flowing positive. Are you finding investors more active? And what are you seeing on your end?
Well, obviously, as we speak today, there was interest rate decrease just last week. And obviously, 25 basis points is nothing crazy. But I believe that if you can find a property that can perform with today's interest rates, the odds of the interest rates going up are very, very low. So when the rates do go down, you're going to have a very good cash flowing property. but there is still a lot of properties lists on the market that are with long-term tenants. So it is very difficult for people to make sense of, buying those properties. Unless you're looking to move in, then, maybe you're house hacking, that might make more sense. But you really need to focus on, it all comes down to the numbers.
All right. For everyone that's listening to this episode, we've had a couple of audio issues here, breaking in and out here, but I think we got the message there. So thanks for bearing with us on this episode. I know it's been a little bit of an unorthodox one, but I think we covered quite a bit here with the property management, the wholesaling business, and then even just kind of the acquisitions and tenant management strategies that you guys have had to deal with. At this point in the podcast, we usually ask our guests kind of two questions. The first question is, for a newer investor that's looking to get started, whether it's in property management, whether it's in wholesaling, or even the, call it active, passive real estate investing strategies, right? What kind of advice do you have to share with them? What kind of risks do you want to make them aware of?
There's definitely a lot of risks. I think the biggest thing is just getting education before you dive into any business. You always want to do your own due diligence on the business. When I say business, I'm talking about rental properties as well, because that is a business. So you want to make sure that, at least connect with somebody who's experienced, or, make sure you feel comfortable risking your capital when it comes to investing in different assets and businesses.
Absolutely. And just to further that point, education, people want to invest in Sudbury. I think you've also organized your own meetup, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we do have a quarterly meetup, and actually we could share the link in the bio, but it's basically just to network with other investors that are in Sudbury, as well as contractors, realtors, people that you could have on your power team, and people that can help you out and grow your portfolio.
Yeah, and it's obviously important to go to events like that, especially if you're looking at investing in a particular city. I remember in Windsor, when I was investing there, one of the biggest pieces that got my power team together was attending those events, because like 1 or 2 sessions, you can really just build out your entire team, boots on the ground, to your point, realtors, contractors, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, for those who are looking to invest in Sudbury, obviously that's a great resource. And how many people, just out of curiosity, how many people do you expect that usually come out to that event?
We've had around 30 to 40 people. So it's not nothing big, but we just do it just because we actually just, enjoy doing it. It doesn't take a lot of time to organize. And I think it just helps you build more credibility as well. When people think about the Sudbury meetups, they think about Alvin Wong and Eric Coulombe, so it helps with branding, it helps with connecting and helping other people. It's just overall, there's not many downsides of having meetups.
No, for sure. And I think the 30 to 40 person ones are the better ones to be at. The smaller, the better almost. Not too small, not like 4 people meeting up, but like as long as there's some significance behind it, I think that's good. I still remember, I think it was like the second or third time I went to Windsor with Austin, and this guy took me to a meetup, and this guy was like the freaking celebrity at this meetup. I'm like, yo, how many times have you fucking come to Windsor for this meetup, Austin? Like, everyone knows you, but that's awesome, man. Second question for you, where do you see your business evolving in the next like 2 to 3 years?
So as we scale the property management business, it's going to be focusing more on recruiting talented in-house employees. And also the wholesaling will likely transition more primarily like on an acquisition funnel for flipping and buying larger multifamily. So just basically continuing to do what I'm doing and, delegating, building systems. I think we're on the right track.
Yeah, I love it. Just if what you're doing right now continues to work, just work on improving it then. Work on improving it, increasing the income, and then it can only scale up from there. Eric, really appreciate you jumping on the podcast, man. Like, it's, as you mentioned, you haven't been in the investing game for too long. I think we've actually been around the same time, but the stuff that you've accomplished, being able to leave your full-time job, being able to build multiple income streams, being able to own multifamily real estate in your hometown, it's just phenomenal, right? And a lot of people can take inspiration to your story. If people want to connect with you, learn more about your journey, attend your event, how could they best do so?
Yeah, reach out to me on Instagram. My link's going to be in the bio. And Facebook, I'm on Facebook as well. Those two are probably the best platforms to reach out to me.
Awesome. So all of that will be down in the show notes below. If you guys enjoy this episode, make sure to share with a friend, leave a 5-star review, comment, and it helps bring amazing guests like Eric onto the podcast. And until next time, everyone, invest smarter and live better. Take care all.